The heavy wooden gavel slammed down in the opulent, velvet-lined auction house, echoing like a death sentence in Callista's ears. Sold. For $25 million. The auctioneer announced, the crowd erupting into a deafening roar of applause. Callista stood frozen at the back of the room, her expensive designer dress feeling like a suffocating straitjacket. She was completely bankrupt, millions of dollars in debt, and moments away from losing her entire real estate empire. On the grand stage, illuminated by blinding, dramatic spotlights, was a massive, breathtaking mural preserved on a raw slab of drywall. It was the exact same drawing she had aggressively scrubbed off the wall of her cheapest apartment with bleach and a wire brush just 2 years ago. The high society crowd rose to a standing ovation as the elusive, anonymous billionaire artist finally stepped onto the stage for the first time in history. Callista's heart violently slammed against her ribs. The blood drained entirely from her face, leaving her as pale as a ghost. Walking into the spotlight in a flawless tailored suit was Leander, the quiet, struggling tenant she had brutally evicted and thrown out into the freezing rain. He didn't celebrate. He didn't smile. Instead, his piercing eyes slowly scanned the crowd, locking directly onto Callista's terrified face. 2 years ago, Leander's deep voice echoed through the microphone, bringing a chilling silence over the room. A landlord told me my art was nothing but vandalized trash. She threw me into the street like garbage and destroyed what was meant to be my greatest gift to her. So, tell me, Callista, how does it feel to know you washed away $25 million with a $10 bottle of bleach? Callista felt her knees buckle. As the entire room of billionaires turned to stare at her in disgust, she realized she had just destroyed the one person who could have saved her life. Welcome back to Moments and Meanings. Before we uncover the incredible twist in today's story, take a quick moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and comment down below with your thoughts on karma. Have you ever judged someone based entirely on how much money they make? Or the clothes on their back? In our superficial world, it is so easy to overlook the quietest people in the room. But sometimes, those quiet people hold the most valuable gifts of all. Today, we are diving into a deeply emotional story about an arrogant landlord who evicted a struggling tenant because she thought he was worthless, only to discover that the mess he left behind on her wall was a priceless masterpiece that could have changed her destiny. Let's begin. The sharp, aggressive clicking of Callista's red-soled designer heels echoed down the dim, flickering hallway of the Oakwood apartments. She pinched the bridge of her nose, adjusting her oversized Chanel sunglasses despite being indoors, desperately trying to block out the smell of stale cooking oil and damp carpet. At 29, Callista had inherited a massive, multi-million-dollar real estate portfolio from her late grandfather. But instead of managing it with the grace and care he had, she viewed the older, lower-income properties like Oakwood as a disgusting stain on her immaculate, high-society brand. She didn't want to be a landlord for struggling families. She wanted to bulldoze the entire block and build towering glass-walled luxury condominiums for the ultra-wealthy. Walking closely beside her was Derek, her fiancé and lead property developer. Derek was a man whose entire personality was defined by the heavy gold Rolex on his wrist and the least Italian sports car parked out front. "I don't even understand why we are doing this in person, Callista," Derek complained, aggressively checking his reflection in his phone screen. He smoothed down his custom-tailored silk suit. "You should have just sent the property manager to hand out the eviction notices. My shoes cost more than these people make in a month. We shouldn't be breathing this air." "Because I want it done today, Derek," Callista snapped, her perfectly manicured fingers clutching a leather clipboard. "The zoning permits for the new luxury high-rise were approved this morning. I need this building completely emptied by the end of the month. I'm starting with the worst offender. Apartment 4B. Apartment 4B was rented by Leander. Leander was the quietest tenant in the entire building. He never threw parties, he never filed complaints, and he was known to help the elderly neighbors carry their groceries up the broken stairwell. But to Callista, Leander was nothing but a nuisance. He worked odd jobs and spent most of his time locked inside his apartment. He didn't drive a fancy car, he didn't wear designer clothes, and worst of all, he was currently exactly $75 short on his monthly rent. Callista marched up to the peeling wooden door of 4B and pounded on it with the heavy side of her diamond ring. "Leander, open this door right now. It's management." A moment later the deadbolt clicked, and the door slowly creaked open. Standing in the doorway was Leander. He looked exhausted, with dark circles under his kind, deeply expressive eyes. He was wearing a pair of faded, oversized denim overalls and a plain white t-shirt that was heavily stained with dark smudges of black charcoal, ink, and vibrant splashes of oil paint. His hands were covered in dark residue, and he held a simple, heavily used rag. Derek instantly took a massive step back, waving a hand in front of his face in exaggerated disgust. "Good heavens, man. Do you bathe in dirt? You look like a walking toxic waste dump." Leander didn't respond with anger. He offered a soft, humble, and deeply polite smile, wiping his stained hands on his rag. "Good morning, Miss Callista." "Good morning, sir. I'm sorry for my appearance. I've been working through the night on a very special project. Please, come in." "I have absolutely no intention of stepping foot into your squalor," Callista said coldly, standing firmly in the hallway, making sure her pristine white trench coat didn't brush against the doorframe. "You are $75 short on your rent, Leander. Again, I don't run a charity, I run a luxury real estate empire." Leander's shoulders slumped slightly, a look of genuine embarrassment washing over his face. "I know, Ms. Callista, and I am so incredibly sorry. The art supply store where I work, part-time, cut my hours this week. But I have the rest of the money, and I promise I will have the $75 for you by Friday morning. I just need 3 more days." "3 days?" Derek scoffed loudly, crossing his arms. "In the real world, pal, bills are due on time. If you can't afford to live here, you should go pitch a tent under the highway." "Wait. Please," Leander said softly. He turned and quickly hurried over to a small wooden table inside the apartment. He picked up a small, tightly rolled piece of thick, textured canvas, tied with a simple piece of brown twine. He walked back to the door and gently offered it to Callista. "What is this?" Callista asked, looking at the rolled canvas as if it were a dead rat. "It's an original charcoal and ink study," Leander explained, his voice filled with a quiet, passionate pride. "I am an artist, Miss Callista. I don't have the $75 today, but I want you to take this as collateral. Or as a gift. I poured my soul into this piece. In the right circles, my work is starting to gain a lot of meaning. Please, just take it, and let me stay." Callista stared at the young man in the paint-stained overalls. She didn't see an artist. She didn't see a soul pouring his passion into the world. Her superficial mind, entirely blinded by price tags, brand names, and high society validation, only saw a delusional, broke beggar trying to trade garbage for shelter. With a look of absolute disdain, Callista batted the rolled canvas away. It hit the floor, unraveling slightly to reveal a glimpse of breathtaking, hyper-realistic charcoal shading. But Callista didn't even look down. "I don't accept arts and crafts for rent, Leander," Callista spat, her voice dripping with venom. "I accept cash. I don't care about your little hobbies." As Callista leaned forward to hand him the eviction warning, she suddenly paused. Her eyes darted past Leander's shoulder, looking deep into the living room of the apartment. Leander had pushed all of his cheap, second-hand furniture into the center of the room, covering them with plastic tarps. And there, on the massive, primary drywall spanning the entire length of the living room, was a gigantic, sprawling mural. It was only half finished, sketched in deep charcoal, raw ink, and striking shadows. Callista's jaw dropped, but not in awe, in sheer, unadulterated fury. What have you done to my property?" Callista gasped, her voice trembling with rage. She pushed past Leander, storming into the apartment, her designer heels clicking aggressively against the cheap linoleum floor. Leander quickly followed her, his hands raised defensively. "Miss Callista, wait. Please let me explain. It's a fresco mural. I've been working on it for weeks. It's a tribute to the struggles and the beauty of the working class in this city. I drew it directly onto the drywall because the texture absorbs the raw ink perfectly. It's a masterpiece in progress." "A masterpiece?" Callista shrieked, her face turning bright red as she pointed a manicured finger at the massive drawing. "You have completely ruined a perfectly good wall. Do you know how much it costs to repaint and prime drywall? You are vandalizing my building." "It's not vandalism," Leander pleaded earnestly, stepping between Callista and the wall. "It has real value. People would travel just to see this." If you let me finish it, it will increase the cultural value of the entire property. Derek walked in behind them, letting out a cruel, mocking laugh. Cultural value? It looks like a giant dirt stain. You're completely out of your mind, buddy. You're just a broke loser smearing mud on walls. Callista turned to Leander, her eyes completely devoid of empathy. She didn't see the incredible, haunting beauty of the artwork. She only saw the cost of a fresh coat of cheap white paint. You have until Friday to hand me the missing $75 in cash. Callista delivered her cold, ruthless ultimatum. And you will personally pay for the damages to this wall, or I will have the police drag you out of here in handcuffs. Friday morning arrived with a violent, freezing downpour. The sky over the city was a dark, bruising gray, and the freezing rain lashed aggressively against the tinted windows of Derek's sleek matte black luxury SUV. Inside the vehicle, the climate control was set to a perfect, cozy 72 degrees. Callista sat in the passenger seat, sipping an $8 artisanal latte, wearing a pristine white cashmere trench coat and knee-high leather boots. She checked her diamond-encrusted watch. It was exactly 9 o'clock in the morning. I can't believe you are actually going in there again, Derek scoffed from the driver's seat, checking his perfectly styled hair in the rearview mirror. We have the demolition permits. Callista, just send the private security team in to drag that broke artist out, by his collar. You are about to be a billionaire real estate mogul. Billionaires don't negotiate with peasants. Callista took a sip of her coffee, her heart hardening under Derek's toxic, superficial influence. He was right. She was destined for high society greatness, and people like Leander were nothing but heavy anchors trying to drag her down into the mud. You're right, Derek, Callista said coldly, her eyes narrowing as she looked at the crumbling brick facade of the Oakwood apartments. I gave him 3 days to pay his late rent and fix my wall. But I am done playing the generous landlord. Today, I am making an example out of him. I want the rest of the tenants to know that when I say a building is being cleared for luxury development, I mean it. Callista stepped out of the warm SUV and into the freezing rain, Derek following closely behind with a large black umbrella to ensure not a single drop touched her expensive outfit. They were accompanied by Brutus, a towering, ruthless private security contractor they had hired to enforce the evictions. The trio marched down the dim, foul-smelling hallway of the 4th floor. Sitting abandoned in the middle of the corridor was a yellow janitorial cart, loaded with heavy cleaning supplies, industrial bleach and rough wire scrub brushes. Callista ignored it, marching straight up to the door of apartment 4B. Before she could even knock, the door swung open. Leander stood there, looking completely exhausted but buzzing with a frantic, desperate energy. His hands were stained entirely black with fresh charcoal and ink. Miss Callista, you're here. Leander gasped, his eyes wide with a mix of fear and desperate hope. He quickly reached into the pocket of his paint-stained overalls and pulled out a crumpled handful of cash. Here. I have it. The $75. I sold my winter coat and my grandfather's watch to the pawn shop this morning. My rent is fully paid. Callista looked at the crumpled, dirty dollar bills in Leander's stained hands, and a wave of absolute disgust washed over her. Keep your pocket change, Leander, Callista said, her voice dripping with ice. The eviction stands. Leander's face dropped in sheer panic. But I have the money. You said if I had the cash by Friday I could stay. I just need to stay until Monday. Why on earth would you need to stay in this dump until Monday? Derek sneered, stepping forward and looking at Leander like he was an insect. We are bulldozing this trash heap next week. Because of the mural. Leander pleaded, tears springing to his exhausted eyes. He stepped aside, pointing frantically into the living room. Look at it. It's finished. Callista and Derek looked past him. The massive drawing that had been a messy sketch 3 days ago was now complete. It was a breathtaking, hyper-realistic masterpiece. The charcoal shadows were so deep and raw they looked three-dimensional, while the sweeping, elegant lines of ink told a haunting, beautiful story of human struggle and resilience. It was the kind of artwork that belonged in the grand halls of a national museum, vibrating with raw, undeniable genius. But Callista's heart was too poisoned by greed to see the beauty. She only saw defiance. A prominent art gallery curator is coming to see it on Monday morning. Leander begged, dropping to his knees on the cheap linoleum floor, clasping his stained hands together. He heard about my work. He wants to safely extract the drywall and transport it to his gallery. Please, Miss Callista. This mural is my life's work. It is my only ticket out of poverty. If you just give me the weekend, I will leave peacefully on Monday, and I will never bother you again. Derek let out a loud, echoing laugh. Extract the drywall? Are you out of your mind? Do you know how much it costs to rip out a structural wall? We aren't delaying our multi-million-dollar demolition so you can play pretend with your little doodles. Callista looked at Leander begging on his knees, and instead of feeling pity, she felt an overwhelming surge of arrogant power. She wanted to crush him. She wanted to prove to Derek and the high society world that she was ruthless. I told you on Tuesday, Leander, Callista hissed, her eyes flashing with pure malice. I told you to fix my wall. But you defied me. You continued to vandalize my property. And now, you are going to learn what happens when you disrespect my empire. Callista turned on her designer heels and marched out into the hallway. She walked straight to the abandoned janitorial cart. She grabbed a large, heavy plastic bottle of industrial bleach and a thick, harsh wire bristle scrubbing brush. Ms. Callista, what are you doing? Leander asked, his voice trembling as he stood up, absolute terror filling his chest. Callista marched back into the apartment, pushing past Leander with violent force. She walked directly up to the center of the breathtaking, priceless mural. No. Please, stop. Leander screamed, lunging forward. But Brutus, the massive security guard, stepped in, grabbing Leander by the collar of his overalls and throwing him violently backward onto the floor. Looking Leander dead in the eye, Callista unscrewed the cap of the bleach and splashed the harsh, toxic liquid directly onto the center of the mural. The raw ink immediately began to violently run, bleeding down the wall like black, agonizing tears. Then, Callista raised the heavy wire brush and slammed it against the drywall. Scrape, scrape, scrape. The horrific sound of the wire bristles tearing through the canvas of the drywall echoed through the room. Callista violently scrubbed the center of the masterpiece, smearing the charcoal, obliterating the intricate details, and ripping the paper backing of the drywall until it was nothing but a ruined, soggy, chemical-soaked gray mess. Leander let out a guttural, agonizing sob. It was the sound of a man watching his entire soul being murdered right in front of him. He curled into a ball on the floor, weeping uncontrollably as the smell of toxic bleach filled the room. There, Callista said breathlessly, tossing the wire brush onto the floor, looking at the ruined art with a sick, triumphant smile. I fixed the vandalism. Now, Brutus, get this garbage out of my building. The towering security guard grabbed Leander by the back of his shirt and dragged him out of the apartment. Leander didn't even fight back. He was completely broken. They threw him out the front doors of the Oakwood apartments and directly into the freezing, violent rainstorm, tossing his small box of art supplies into a muddy puddle beside him. Callista and Derek stood under their black umbrella, laughing cruelly as they watched the humble artist shiver in the freezing mud, mourning the destruction of his masterpiece. Callista felt like a queen who had just conquered her kingdom. She had absolutely no idea that she had just scrubbed away her own salvation, and that the countdown to her total, devastating ruin had officially begun. 2 years had passed since the freezing morning Callista threw a weeping artist into the mud, and the universe had returned her cruelty with absolute, devastating precision. The grand, glittering illusion of Callista's high society real estate empire had completely collapsed. Her downfall began exactly 1 month after she demolished the Oakwood apartments. The multi-million-dollar luxury high-rise project, which she had staked her entire fortune and family legacy on, was permanently halted. The city inspectors discovered a massive, unstable sinkhole directly beneath the property, a geological nightmare that made any construction completely illegal. The land became instantly worthless. The financial ruin was terrifyingly fast. The banks called in her massive loans, foreclosing on every single one of her grandfather's properties. Her luxury vehicles were repossessed. And Derek the arrogant, Rolex-wearing fionk who had convinced her to act like a ruthless dictator, showed his true colors the very second her bank accounts were frozen. He didn't offer to help her. Instead, he secretly transferred the last remaining dregs of their development funds into an offshore account, packed his bags and fled the country, leaving Callista to face the federal bankruptcy investigators entirely alone. Now Callista was a hollow, desperate shell of the arrogant woman she used to be. She was millions of dollars in debt and facing potential prison time for the financial negligence Derek had pinned on her. Ironically, she now lived in a cramped, foul-smelling, moldy studio apartment on the rough side of the city, a place far worse than the one she had evicted Leander from. She had one single, fragile lifeline left. Tonight was the most exclusive, high-society event of the decade, the Grand Winter Showcase at the Lumiere Auction House. Callista knew that a powerful, eccentric billionaire investor named Arthur Sterling would be in attendance. If she could just get 5 minutes with him to pitch a desperate restructuring plan for her last remaining piece of property, he could write a check that would save her from federal prison. Callista had pawned her very last possession, the diamond engagement ring Derek had left behind, just to bribe a security guard to let her through the service entrance of the auction house. She stood at the very back of the opulent, velvet-lined grand ballroom, hiding in the shadows. She was wearing her last remaining designer dress, though if one looked closely, the hem was frayed, and it hung loosely on her anxious, undernourished frame. The room was filled with the ultra-wealthy, sipping vintage champagne and holding numbered golden bidding paddles. It was a world she used to rule, and now, she wasn't even allowed to breathe the same air. "Ladies and gentlemen," the sophisticated auctioneer announced from the brightly lit grand stage, tapping his heavy wooden gavel. "We have reached the crown jewel of the evening. For the past 2 years, the global art community has been captivated by the sudden, explosive rise of an anonymous genius, a master of charcoal and ink, who captures the raw, bleeding soul of the working class. Tonight, for the first time ever, the artist has agreed to reveal his identity, and to auction his most legendary, deeply personal masterpiece." The high society crowd leaned forward, buzzing with intense, greedy anticipation. Callista nervously scanned the room, desperately trying to spot Arthur Sterling in the sea of tuxedos. This piece was salvaged from a condemned apartment building just days before its demolition, the auctioneer continued, his voice echoing with profound reverence. "It was meticulously extracted from the very drywall it was created on. But what makes this piece a true, priceless masterpiece is the violent scar across its center." Callista froze. A strange, sickening chill washed over her arms. "The artist titled this piece, 'The Violence of Greed,'" the auctioneer declared. With a dramatic flourish, 2 attendants pulled down a massive black velvet curtain on the stage. Callista's jaw dropped in sheer, unadulterated horror. The breath was violently knocked from her lungs. Sitting on the grand stage, illuminated by blinding, dramatic spotlights and encased in a massive custom-built reinforced glass frame, was a gigantic, sprawling mural on a raw slab of drywall. It was the breathtaking, hyper-realistic charcoal and ink drawing of the working-class struggle. And right in the absolute center of the masterpiece was a massive, smeared, chemical-burned gray stain, violently ripped open by the deep, aggressive gouges of a harsh wire bristle brush. It was her wall. It was the exact same mural Callista had aggressively scrubbed with industrial bleach 2 years ago. "Notice the violent chemical destruction in the center," the auctioneer said, gesturing toward the bleach stain with absolute awe. The artist allowed a ruthless, greedy landlord to physically attack the artwork with bleach and a wire brush. The landlord believed she was destroying it, but in reality, her hateful act of vandalism became the profound finishing touch. The chemical burn represents how superficial greed attempts to wash away the beauty of the human soul. It is a legendary statement on class warfare. Callista's mind violently fractured. The entire room began to spin. She hadn't destroyed the masterpiece. Her cruelty had accidentally made it the most famous, philosophically profound piece of contemporary art in the world. "We shall start the bidding at $10 million, the auctioneer shouted. Instantly, golden paddles flew into the air. 12 million. 15. $20 million to the gentleman in the front. Callista grabbed the velvet drape of the back wall, her knees shaking so violently she could barely stand. She watched, completely paralyzed, as the billionaire Arthur Sterling, the very man she had come to beg for a meager bailout, raised his paddle. $25 million. Sterling shouted. "Sold. For $25 million. The auctioneer announced, slamming his wooden gavel down like a death sentence. The crowd erupted into a deafening roar of applause, rising to a standing ovation. Callista began to hyperventilate. She had literally scrubbed $25 million with a $10 bottle of bleach. She had thrown away a fortune that could have saved her entire real estate empire, all because she was too arrogant to look past a pair of paint-stained overalls. And now, the auctioneer smiled, gesturing toward the side of the stage. Please welcome the anonymous genius himself. The creator of the violence of greed. The blood drained entirely from Callista's face. Walking into the blinding spotlight, flanked by elite security and met with thunderous applause from the richest people in the city, was Leander. He was no longer the exhausted, trembling tenant in faded denim overalls. He was a vision of absolute power and artistic royalty. He wore a flawless, custom-tailored burgundy velvet suit, his posture completely straight, radiating an unimaginable level of wealth and quiet, devastating authority. He didn't celebrate the $25 million sale. He didn't wave to the clapping billionaires. Instead, his piercing, intelligent eyes slowly scanned the massive ballroom, cutting through the crowd until they locked directly onto Callista's terrified, pale face hiding in the shadows at the back of the room. The roles were entirely reversed. The worthless tenant was now a king, and the luxury landlord was nothing but a beggar in his court. The thunderous applause inside the velvet-lined ballroom slowly faded into a tense, electrifying silence as Leander stepped up to the crystal microphone on the grand stage. The brilliant, blinding spotlights caught the rich texture of his tailored burgundy velvet suit. He looked nothing like the broken, weeping man shivering in the mud 2 years ago. He stood with the quiet, unshakable confidence of a man who had walked through the fire and emerged as a king. Callista remained frozen at the back of the room, her heart hammering wildly against her ribs as Leander's piercing eyes remained locked onto her from across the sea of billionaires. Thank you. Leander's deep, steady voice echoed through the massive speakers, commanding the absolute attention of every powerful investor in the room. But I cannot take full credit for this $25 million masterpiece. A piece of art is only as powerful as the emotion it captures. And the true emotion of this piece, the violent, chaotic destruction in the absolute center of the canvas, was graciously provided by my former landlord. A murmur of intrigued whispers rippled through the high society crowd. 2 years ago, I was a struggling artist living in a crumbling apartment building, Leander continued, his voice echoing with haunting clarity. I was exactly $75 short on my rent. I offered my landlord my art, my passion, and my absolute dedication, begging for just 3 days of grace. Do you know what she did? The room fell dead silent. Callista felt a cold, terrifying sweat break out across her neck. She walked into my home with a bottle of industrial bleach and a heavy wire brush, Leander said, gesturing toward the massive chemical-burned scar in the center of the beautiful mural. She looked me dead in the eye and violently scrubbed away what she called vandalism. She laughed as her security guard threw me into the freezing rain. She didn't see a human being fighting to survive. She didn't see a soul. She only saw a $75 deficit. Gasps of horror and disgust erupted from the wealthy crowd. Several billionaires shook their heads in disbelief at such ruthless cruelty. But her greed was her ultimate undoing, Leander revealed, delivering the twist that made Callista's blood run entirely cold. She was so blinded by her arrogance that she abandoned the building instantly, rushing off to bulldoze the property for a luxury high-rise that she never even got to build. Because she left in such a rush, she didn't realize that the art gallery curator I had told her about was already waiting down the street. The moment her sleek SUV drove away, he walked right into the unlocked apartment, brought in a professional extraction crew, and safely cut the drywall right out of the building. Callista's jaw trembled uncontrollably. She had literally left the multi-million-dollar asset completely unguarded, because she was in too much of a rush to go sip champagne. She thought she was destroying me, Leander said, his voice lowering into a tone of absolute, devastating power. But all she did was add the final, priceless stroke to my masterpiece. Her hate was the catalyst for my success. The realization hit Callista with the force of a high-speed train. The sheer panic of her impending bankruptcy, the fear of federal prison, and the terrifying reality of her ruined life violently collided in her mind. She completely snapped. Leander. Callista shrieked, her voice cracking hysterically as she abandoned her hiding spot. She shoved past a group of shocked investors, frantically running down the center aisle of the opulent ballroom. Her frayed designer dress snagged on a velvet chair, but she didn't care. She was hyperventilating, tears of absolute desperation streaming down her pale face as she rushed the stage. Leander, please. Callista sobbed, scrambling up the carpeted stairs of the stage before two massive security guards stepped in front of her, crossing their arms to block her path. The entire room of high society elites gasped, stepping back in sheer disgust as they recognized the woman Leander had just described. Arthur Sterling, the eccentric billionaire Callista had come to beg for a bailout, looked at her with an expression of pure, unadulterated revulsion. Leander raised a single calm hand, signaling the security guards to hold their ground but let her speak. Callista, Leander said softly, looking down at the weeping, trembling woman. How the tables have turned. I'm so sorry, Leander. Callista wailed, dropping to her knees on the edge of the stage, her pride entirely broken. You have to understand. Derek manipulated me. He told me to be ruthless. I was stressed about the demolition. I didn't know the mural would be worth $25 million. Please, you have to help me. She reached through the legs of the security guards, desperately trying to grab Leander's polished shoes. Help you? Leander asked, his expression completely carved from stone. Why would I help the woman who threw me into the mud? Because that was my wall. Callista screamed, her greed and desperation blinding her once again. It was my building. I own that drywall. You just sold my property for $25 million to Arthur Sterling. I am millions in debt, Leander. The federal investigators are coming for me tomorrow. I'm going to prison. If you just give me half the money, even a quarter of it, it will save my life. You owe me. A collective groan of absolute disgust echoed through the auction house. The audacity of her greed was sickening. Leander did not yell. He did not lose his temper. He simply reached into the inner pocket of his burgundy velvet suit and pulled out a crisp, folded legal document. He stepped past the security guards and held it out for Callista to read. You don't own anything, Callista, Leander stated, his voice ringing with cold finality. When you went bankrupt, the bank foreclosed on all of your properties. You lost the deed to the Oakwood apartments over a year ago. Do you know who the bank sold the deed to at the public foreclosure auction for pennies on the dollar? Callista's tear-filled eyes scanned the legal document. The name at the top of the property deed was printed in bold black ink, Leander Vance. No, Callista whimpered, all the air leaving her lungs as the ultimate crushing truth settled over her. Yes, Leander said quietly. I bought the building you kicked me out of, which means the wall belongs to me. The art belongs to me. And the $25 million belongs to me. You scrubbed away your own salvation, Callista, and there is nothing left in this world for you to claim. Callista knelt on the edge of the grand stage, the crisp legal document slipping from her trembling fingers. The reality of the property deed crashed down on her like a physical weight. She didn't own the wall. She didn't own the art. She was entirely, hopelessly destitute. In a final, pathetic act of desperation, Callista turned her tear-streaked face away from Leander and looked toward the front row. There stood Arthur Sterling, the eccentric billionaire she had originally planned to beg for a bailout. Mr. Sterling, please. Callista wailed, crawling slightly toward the edge of the stage, her frayed designer dress tangling around her knees. You have $25 million. You can see I am a victim of circumstance. My fiancé stole my money. If you just invest a fraction of that into my restructuring plan, I can build you the greatest luxury high-rise this city has ever seen. Please, I am a brilliant developer. Arthur Sterling looked down at the weeping, pathetic woman with an expression of pure, unadulterated revulsion. He adjusted his expensive silk tie and stepped backward, ensuring she couldn't reach his shoes. A brilliant developer? Sterling scoffed, his voice echoing loudly through the silent ballroom. You are the epitome of a toxic asset, Callista. You had a $25 million masterpiece sitting inside a building you owned, and your first instinct was to destroy it with bleach because you were blinded by a $75 late fee. You don't know the first thing about value. I wouldn't trust you to manage a lemonade stand, let alone my money. The crowd of high society elites erupted into mocking laughter, entirely turning their backs on the woman who had once desperately tried to be one of them. Sterling turned to the towering security guards. Get this trespassing garbage out of my sight. She is ruining the ambiance of a historic evening. Without hesitation, the two massive security guards grabbed Callista by the arms of her ruined dress. No. Please. You don't understand. Callista shrieked, her voice breaking into a hysterical, breathless panic as they hauled her effortlessly off the stage. She kicked and thrashed, but it was completely useless. She was dragged backward down the velvet-lined center aisle, forced to watch Leander standing tall and victorious in the spotlight as the billionaires clapped for him once again. The heavy glass doors of the Lumiere auction house swung open, and Callista was violently thrown out into the freezing, pouring rain. She hit the hard, wet pavement, scraping her knees as she tumbled into a puddle of dirty street water. It was the exact same freezing rain, the exact same humiliating physical removal, and the exact same absolute despair she had forced upon Leander 2 years ago. The circle of karma was complete. But the universe wasn't finished with her yet. As Callista scrambled to her hands and knees, shivering uncontrollably in the freezing downpour, the blaring, deafening sound of police sirens pierced the night air. Suddenly, 3 black federal SUVs swerved aggressively up to the curb, their flashing red and blue lights illuminating the dark street. The doors flew open, and armed federal agents jumped out. But they weren't just coming for Callista. Dragged out of the back of the lead SUV, wearing handcuffs and a soaked, ruined silk suit, was Derek. The arrogant ex-fiancé who had abandoned Callista and fled with their remaining funds had not made it far. His face was bruised, and he looked absolutely terrified. "Callista," Derek shouted, his eyes wide with panic as the agents pushed him toward her. "Tell them it was your company. Tell them I was just a consultant. They caught me at the private airstrip. They froze the offshore accounts. I have nothing." A federal investigator in a heavy raincoat walked up to Callista, looking down at her shivering, pathetic form with cold authority. "Callista, you are under arrest for severe corporate fraud, embezzlement, and gross financial negligence. Your partner here tried to pin it all on you, but the paper trail implicates both of you in stealing millions from your own investors to fund your personal luxury lifestyle." "No," Callista sobbed, holding her hands up defensively. "It was him. Derek manipulated me. He made me evict those people. He made me ruthless. I have nothing left." "Save it for the judge," the federal agent said coldly, pulling out a pair of heavy steel handcuffs. Right there on the freezing wet sidewalk outside the auction house, Callista and Derek violently turned on each other. They screamed, cried, and blamed one another, their toxic relationship entirely imploding as they were both forcefully shoved into the back of a federal police cruiser. They had chased money and status at the expense of their souls, and now they were going to spend the next decade in a cramped concrete prison cell, stripped of every luxury they had ever worshipped. 6 months later, the sun shone brightly over the Oakwood apartments. But it was no longer a crumbling, foul-smelling building waiting for demolition. The entire property had been beautifully, meticulously renovated. The brick facade was repaired, the hallways were painted with bright, warm colors, and a massive community garden had been planted in the central courtyard. Standing in the newly refurbished lobby was Leander. He was wearing a fresh pair of denim overalls, but this time, he looked healthy, vibrant, and at total peace. He hadn't used his $25 million fortune to buy luxury sports cars or penthouses. Instead, he had fully purchased the Oakwood building, canceled all the outstanding debts of the struggling families living there, and established a rent-controlled sanctuary for the working-class community that had always supported him. Walking down the stairs with a basket of fresh, warm muffins was Mrs. Higgins, the elderly tenant Leander used to help carry groceries for. "Good morning, Leander." Mrs. Higgins smiled warmly, her eyes crinkling with genuine joy. "The building looks absolutely beautiful. You've given us all a miracle." "The building was always beautiful, Mrs. Higgins," Leander replied softly, taking a muffin with a grateful smile. "It just needed someone who was willing to look past the dirt to see its true potential." Leander turned around to face the main wall of the lobby. He picked up a piece of dark charcoal and a fresh brush of raw ink. He was starting a new mural. Not one born from pain and eviction, but one born from hope, community, and redemption. He had lost his first masterpiece to the violent hands of greed, but in the end, he had gained something infinitely more valuable. He had gained the power to ensure that no one in his community would ever be thrown out into the cold again. Leander had proven that true wealth isn't measured by the brand of your clothes or the balance in your bank account. It is measured by the beauty you leave behind in the lives of others.